who's going to talk about ownership.
Thank you. So, excuse me, one of the terms that the administration had negotiated with the owner of the parcels was this concept called a deed in lieu of foreclosure. And that's, sorry, a little bit louder. I'll pull this a little bit closer. Sorry about that. I have a bit of a cold, and so my head's a little stuffy too, so forgive me. The deed in lieu of foreclosure, and as part of the security interest, as you are well aware, the city has a mortgage interest in the property. It required the developer to execute these deeds, effectively quitclaim deeds. And what that said, what the deed in lieu of foreclosure is that rather than foreclosing on the mortgage, the developer agreed that the city could just take title to the property without having to go through that foreclosure process. And if I could just I'll just keep going. And so at the time that I think the second development agreement was executed, new quitclaim deeds were executed by FDP's member, Rodney Blackwell, and those are currently being held. Now, the quitclaim deeds, I mean, they're just a piece of paper sitting in a file. They're not recorded with the Register of Deeds. They don't give the city at this point in time any greater ownership interest than anybody off the street, than than any of us individually in this room have here today. There need to be a number of steps before those deeds can be executed. And the reason that those steps need to be taken is primarily because of title insurance. When you buy a home, you have your title work done, and your title company issues a policy of title insurance. So if there's an unknown lien or something like that, or some debt against the property, then that title insurance policy kicks in and will cover that. And so this, I'm trying not to get too legalese with it, but those documents need to be executed, but they need to be executed as part of a negotiation with the current holder of the property. And I realize I'm sort of jumping ahead here, and I don't mean to presume that the council is wishing to go forward with the deed in lieu of foreclosure, but I just wanted you to know that that is the best and the most efficient option. The other option would be an actual foreclosure process, but what that does is it requires us to file an action in circuit court, requires litigation, requires getting a judgment of foreclosure, and then putting the property up for sheriff's sale. And at that sheriff's sale, anybody could purchase the property. So while usually the lender goes in and purchases it for the amount of their loan, it does open it up that another buyer could, purchase that property. And honestly, the deed in lieu of foreclosure process, it's a shorter process, it's less expensive, and acquisition can occur relatively quickly because, as we discussed at the last meeting on this topic, taxes are going to add on as of January 1st, 2018. As the properties are still in FDP's name as a private entity, taxes will add on. And so, excuse me, if we put off the process till after January 1st, then we run that risk of those taxes running to the property. And so the recommendation is that the Common Council authorize the deed in lieu of foreclosure process, authorize city staff to have communications with the owner to, in furtherance of that process. Excuse me. I think that covers it. I just wanted to address a question I think it was the Alderman of the 3rd had at the last meeting. And it was, what happens if the city doesn't take any action? And I think that's an important question to answer. As we know, the properties have been sitting vacant for a period of time, and presumably they'll continue to sit vacant and rack up property taxes, that will add on every year. And often when that happens, when property taxes add on and the property owner doesn't pay their property taxes, the county would foreclose based on the tax arrearages. I'm not seeing a lot of foreclosures on big parcels in the city happening. tax foreclosures happening in the city happening. So I don't know that the county would necessarily foreclose once it had the ability to do so. So we could be sitting with an empty vacant property for a number of years. Another option is that the owner may sell it. And because, again, it's owned by a private owner, yes, there is the security interest, there is that mortgage interest, and the buyer would take it with that mortgage interest because that would run with the property. It would be an encumbrance on the property. But that's just another option. And so who knows what will happen if the owner would try to sell it. Honestly, the owner in this case hasn't been doing much of anything. So I don't even know that that's something that would feasibly happen. But I just wanted to sort of allay the concerns of Alderman Tate and answer that question as well.
So giving you a quick map just to show you who owns which parcels. The red parcels are parcels that are owned generally by the City of Racine. Now this is an old parcel map on our GS right now. It hasn't been updated to reflect the property transfer from the Knowles Nelson grant. I'll show that in the next slide. But generally the properties in red are owned by the city. The properties, Properties in red are owned by FDP MR LLC. Property in blue, the dark blue, is owned by the City of Racine. Properties in purple are owned by the RDA. So that kind of gives you a sense of what are the 27 acres of what we would consider a project formerly known as Machinery Row properties. And then here's a more up-to-date description of the properties that are actually owned. Lot 3 is owned by the City of Racine. Lots 1, lots 2, lots 4 are owned by Rodney Blackwell or FDP MR LLC. Does that make sense? So everybody's kind of clear on what the ownership is right now? Okay. And also just know that there are several buildings with several addresses on the property.